Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the stream. I hope we're online. I hope we're good. Um, Give me a quick audio check. Just spam the chat really quickly with a hello and let me know that you can hear me. Oh, smash the like button like Retain Ascension just said as well. You can do that as well. But yeah, just let me know that you can hear me okay. And then I think we'll just get underway straight away with this one. So yeah, let me know. Let me know. Give me some feedback in the chat. And once I know that I'm audible and it's all good, I'll get going. Um, I might as well, whilst I'm waiting for people to give me feedback on that. Thank you. Getting some. Well, what Darth Skywalker's the only person who's giving me feedback, but he said good sound. So yeah, appreciated. Thank you. That's good. Okay, we're good. All right, they're coming through. Comments coming through now. So let me give a few shout outs and hellos to everybody before we get started. So Talia, Macy, Stephen, usual suspects, Darth Skywalker, Kimmit Free, Nola, Wildflower, Zayhoven, another regular, Eldana, Retain Ascension, sorry if I'm butchering people's names, the souls of our ancestors, Talia, always here, Stephen, Wesker, fantastic. I got an admin up there as well, mod, sorry, and Ake here, but fuck you guys. HH, there's a name I'm not gonna even try and pronounce there. Maureen, Dallas, Tahaka. I know you guys have been here for a little while waiting. Thank you everyone for joining me today on today's live stream. Unapologetically real Feliciano. What's going on? Hello everybody. Hello. Thank you for joining me on today's live stream. And as you can see, the topic should be a relatively straightforward one. It was a surprise to me because a lot of people are commenting now that they always kind of knew and always suspected, and I didn't. And this is me definitely putting my hand up. I was kind of I stumbled into this information, and then when I stumbled into the information, it kind of led me down a bit of a rabbit hole, I'm not gonna lie. And I was like, blimey, because to give a bit of a backdrop, I always believed that I never had a problem with the Fayum mummies. I always thought, I'm sorry, not the Fayum mummies, the Fayum portraits, I should say. And we're going to learn a bit about the Fayum mummies as well today as well. So blimey, we're going to learn a lot. Yeah, but I never had an issue with the Fayum portraits. I was just like, well, these are Greeks, For me, the Hellenized gear that they wore, they're always in Hellenistic gear. Nothing they did was in any ways contiguous with the ancient Kemetic culture, apart from the fact perhaps that they were being mummified. But other than that, everything about them and their culture suggested Greek ancestry. And so for me, they were very easy to ignore and kind of just say, okay, it's fine, it's Greeks, isn't it? We know that Egypt at this time, and we can call it Egypt this time because it was no longer Kemits. We know that Egypt at this time was full of essentially settlers from the various invasions, obviously starting with the Persian, moving on to the Greek, then the Roman. So we'd have, by this time we'd had nearly like 500 years worth of, foreign interest, for want of a better word, in the Delta region of Egypt, certainly, but particularly obviously around the major city centers and some of the kind of hub cities such as the Fayum. So we know that the Fayum was a hub city. It was a settling. The Fayum was essentially completely derelict, and it was rebuilt during the Ptolemaic period by one of the Ptolemies. I think it was Ptolemy the third, if I remember correctly. I'll have to double check that, but I think it was Ptolemy the third who rebuilt the Fayum, and he used it as a point for his basically his Greek what's the word? Veterans. That's it. Veterans to settle and to kind of raise their family. So he rebuilt the Fayum. So obviously give the Greeks props for that, but it was their city. So in essence, in my mind, anything that came out of the Fayum was not indigenously Kemetic. So it wasn't a problem for me that the Fayum portraits resembled kind of modern Egyptians, because to be honest with me, that's always been my kind of um, talking point. I always say, look, most modern Egyptians probably descend back to the Greeks because, and my argument, a lot of my rationale for that was based on the fact that modern Egyptians look like the Fayum portraits. So I was like, well, modern Egyptians look like the Fayum portraits, so therefore it makes sense that they are the descendants of the Greeks. Okay, that was quite easy for me, and I actually had a lot that built from that as well, because then that was always what my phenotype for what the ancient Greeks looked like. So every time I thought of ancient Greeks, I just thought of modern Egyptians. I thought, okay, all of these. So when I kind of put that modern Egyptian um, phenotype onto whatever I'm looking at. Lo and behold, all of that seems to be getting blown out of the window now, because I have no idea, first of all, what the Greeks look like, what the Fayumites look like, and I would say that no one else does either, because there is a whole bunch of skullduggery when it comes to the Fayum portraits, a whole bunch. So we got some papers to get through. We're gonna have to do a lot of reading. Sorry, is the volume a bit low? Let me boom boom boom. I'll try and turn it up a little bit. It doesn't look too low for me. I wonder why it's coming up. I'll put my mouth closer to it now, so it might peak a little bit every now and then, but that's what we're gonna have to deal with. Okay, so I'm gonna get a bit closer to the mic. Hopefully that deals with it, because my volume's quite high. Don't want to turn it up much louder than it is, because it will start distorting. So we got a few papers to get through. Kadir, thank you very much for the donation. Let's just have a read through what you've said here. It says the people squatting over North Africa right now are the last vestiges of the Ottoman Turkic Empire, and they are declining. Just like in the past, another people will take control of that territory. I'm not gonna argue with that. I think there's certainly a lot of Ottoman, Turkic, Mamluk ancestry, and I think a few of the indigenous folk in Egypt at the moment will tell you the same. They will tell you exactly the same. If you get a chance to speak to some, Nubians, they will tell you exactly that. So yeah, I agree with that, and thank you for the donation. I really, really appreciate it. So I mean, can you hear me a bit better now, guys? Because a couple of people have asked me to turn my volume up. Let me see if I can do something else, because if my volume's still low, I'm not actually sure what's causing. Actually, no, it could be something really basic. Let me have a look. No, that's the out. I don't think that wouldn't affect the volume, would it? I don't think that would affect. No, that's not input. You're going to see how untechnical I am now. I don't know. Okay, someone said sound is crisp and clear. Okay, good. I'm going to roll with it, guys. I'm sorry if it's low. I am. I genuinely am sorry if it's low, but I don't know what's causing it on this occasion. So I'm just going to roll with it, and I'm afraid you're going to have to turn up. Sorry, guys. A few people are saying it's fine, so thank you for the feedback, guys. All right, so we've got a few papers to get through. It's going to be very read heavy today. In fact, it's going to be so read heavy that I'm going to open up an app that I've not used before, but it seems to work really well, called Magnifier. I think it's one of those apps that you use when you're partially blind. So yeah, this is going to help us when we're reading along. Isn't that cool? Get a little 200% magnification along the top. So we've got a lot of reading to do, and yeah, apologies in advance, but there isn't really much we can do in terms of getting around that issue. There's not much that we can do. Yeah, we have to do some reading. We have to do some reading today, but I promise you it's going to be worth your while, and I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey. And in fact, actually, on that note, this is a bit of a it's a bit of a part two. So those of you who tuned in, shout out to you if you tuned into my live stream, I think about 2 weeks ago now, that I did on Carolyn Wilkinson and the whole forensic facial reconstruction process that she kind of takes. And this is actually where I was going to cover some of this in that live stream, and I'm glad I didn't, because actually this topic does deserve its own kind of source of attention that we're giving it today. It deserves us to give it a bit of time to really digest what's going on here, because this is a massive area, particularly in this kind of realm of Egyptology that we find ourselves in. So this is like a part two, because Carolyn Wilkerson is actually a big part of some of the stuff that we're going to be discussing today. So yeah. So let's get started. Thinking the best. All right. So the best thing to get started with is there's this kind of like this overall. There's this over. Let me just quickly put this donation on. Thank you very much, Kimberly, for the donation. I much appreciate you for that. She says, been watching your channel for a while. Keep going. I will. Especially with people like you giving me support. It's much appreciated. So I'm going to quickly just find that paper and get the first paper and get it. Everything's open already. What we're talking about. So the first one we're going to jump into is actually this one, and this is a bit of an overview. It's a really good overview about the Fayum Portraits. Okay, and some of it's going to be enlightening to you. So a lot of, like I said today, is going to be me just reading to you. So yeah. So a lot of it's going to be reading, a lot of this live stream is going to be me just reading to you, but you're going to get a lot from it, or at least I hope you're going to get a lot from it. And you're going to learn a bit about some of these things that we just kind of take for granted as being real when they're not, which is kind of a bit weird, because I wasn't expecting that. So anyway, this paper is called The Mummy Portraits in the J. Paul Getty Museum by David L. Thompson. Okay, so let's dive in, because I learned a lot about the Fayum Portraits from this. So in fact, let me just zoom out a little bit. Zoomed in a bit too much. It's going to be a bit of a pain. There we go. All right. So I'm going to do a little bit of jumping around. We're not going to read everything, naturally, because that will just take way too long. And let me get my magnifier open again. Okay. There we go. All right. So here we are. So let's scroll down. So first of all, okay. So let's hit with our first surprise. So first of all, we're gonna do a lot of just like reading the blurb for the figures, but we'll also do a little bit of reading in the kind of main areas themselves, at least where it's kind of interesting. Okay. So I'm gonna start here in book 35 of his Naturalis Historia, written in the 1st century AD during the reign of Emperor Vespasian. The elder Pliny laments the decadence of wall painting at Rome and goes on to say, even the painting of portraits by which the closest possible likeness of deceased persons were handed down from age to age has died out completely. The explanation for this, he continues, is very simple. They display throughout their bedrooms and carry with them portraits of Epicurus. In other words, Pliny is saying that no one cares any longer about honor or fame, and therefore about being remembered by future generations in painted portraits. Okay, so just to get an overview there of the way painting is perceived during this time. Okay, and all of this will come together. So there's a reason why I'm going to read kind of certain excerpts today. Now, I also want to draw your attention to I also wanted to draw your attention to this map as well, okay? Because this map actually shows us that the Fayum Portraits, or at least what we know as the Fayum Portraits, weren't just found in Fayum, okay? And this is where a lot of the forgery starts to, I'm going to let it unfold and let you guys kind of digest what's actually taking place as these Fayum portraits are becoming more and more desired and wanted, and how they start to pop up in very strange places. So it says here, a map of Egypt with find spots of portraits outside the Fayum, indicated in black. Okay, so wherever you see like a black dot on this map, so this is a map of all of Egypt right down to the first cataract. Yeah. And you can see here, let me just quickly, you can't really see the names, okay, but you can kind of get a rough idea of where we're talking about here. So here's your Delta region, okay, here's your Fayum Oasis. So over here, this area over here that I'm hovering over now, that's the Fayum Oasis. And that's where you find all the tombs, including Abu Sir el-Melik, which is quite famous now. They'll all be around that kind of Fayum Oasis area. And then see these black dots along the Nile. These are allegedly different spots where they found Fayum portraits. So right up to Upper Egypt here, okay? Really deep into Upper Egypt here. We're talking about, bordering Aswan here. We're finding these Fayum portraits, okay? So I want you to bear that in mind. These aren't just being found in the Fayum area. Allegedly, they're being found all up and down the Nile. So just bear that in mind, okay? All right, let's keep going. So I'm just going to read the kind of blurb for this image here as well. So let's kind of take in this image that you're viewing here, and let's read the blurb for it. We're going to do a lot of blurb reading. During the Roman period in Egypt, portraits on wooden panels regularly were wrapped in mummies over the wrapped in mummies over the head of the deceased, with a part of the painting showing the subject's head and neck left exposed to view. This complete mummy, recovered in Hawara by Sir W.M. Flinders Petrie. I hope you guys are all familiar with that name. This is one of the most virulent racists in Egyptology. Okay? So I do want you to bear in mind who has been responsible for a lot of these finds. Okay, this is the proponent. W.M. Flinders Petrie is the inventor of the Hamitic race theory. Okay, so he invented the Hamitic race theory. So that was the idea that a superior European race came down from Europe and basically ruled dynastic Egypt. So they came down and they brought their superior knowledge that they hadn't used at all on the European continent and wouldn't be using the European continent for another 2,000 to 3,000 years. But they came in, they brought their superior brains and they ruled the primitive backwards Africans and taught them everything they knew and ruled from the top. This is your inventor of it, Flinders Petrie. So straight away you have very clear motive for what became a massive trade in these Fayum portraits. Okay, so it dates to the late 2nd century AD, Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Okay, so 2nd century AD is where it dates to. So, between 100 and 200 AD. Okay. I'm not going to read all of this. I'm going to skip to the next page because we've got a lot to get through and some things are relevant and some things aren't. So here are some of the early finds, okay? And once again, we are going to read a bit over here as well, but I want to just read these excerpts for these pictures first of all. So first of all, for this picture, also during the Roman period, but less commonly, sculpted stucco masks covered the heads of mummies. So we know in ancient Egypt they like to create masks on the mummies, gilded masks, wooden, normally gilded masks. They're normally not very detailed. I think I mentioned before in previous live stream or previous chat that they don't normally resemble the person who's inside. So, for instance, Mahepri's one doesn't look anything like him. A lot of them, to be honest with you, a lot of these kind of gilded sarcophagus masks do not resemble the person inside. But that wasn't the purpose of them, because they essentially worked like Russian dolls. You'd have a coffin, and inside the coffin you'd have another coffin, another. So the one on the outside would be very spread and very kind of like wasn't supposed to look, exactly like the person. So this is just kind of one of the traits that you get of those masks that sit on the very outside of the coffin. Although as an art form, the mummy mask originated in native Egyptian art of very recent times and continued to be produced throughout the Ptolemaic period. Examples from the Roman era were the first to approximate naturalistic representation. So remember, this kind of goes in hand with what I was just talking about. The fact that they're not supposed to. These outer coffins weren't supposed to look very naturalistic. Late first century AD is when this one was produced. So that's. Let's just quickly scroll up so you can see it. That's this one over here. Okay, late first century AD. So this is obviously Roman era. I don't have to worry too much. Now let's go over to the second one, because this second one has got a very, to me personally, a very kind of modern, I'd say borderline modern Egyptian / Nubian look. If this person came up to me and said they was say like a really dark Saidi, I'd say fair enough. If this person came up to me and said they were Nubian, I'd say fair enough. If this person came up to me and said they're even fuller or Ethiopian, I would say fair enough. So we've got quite an A-racial person here, for want of a better word. Okay, so it's quite an A-racial person we have here. But either which way, you know, sits in, I would say, somewhere, you know, within the kind of melanated / black bracket, definitely. Okay, now let's have a look at what it says about the blurb. So it says, this is one of the earliest Fayum portraits to have been recovered. This painting was bought in Egypt by a British diplomat in the early 19th century. Okay, so we're looking at the early 1800s. Encaustic on wood, 3rd century AD is dated to. Okay, so somewhere between 200 and 300 AD. All right, and it was one of the first that was uncovered, and that was in the early 1800s. So I want you to remember all of that. And bear in mind, this one maybe is a more truer representation of what your Greeks look like, because I'm still leaning on the side that these are all Greco, they're all Greeks, because they still are Hellenistic. Okay, so I'm not leaning in any way, shape, or form towards the idea that any of these, regardless of what they look like in the end, are native Kemetic people. I'm still leaning on the side that these are all Greeks, essentially, because they carry out Greek customs as opposed to Egyptian customs. So let's have a quick read. Recovery and provenance. Museums and collections throughout the world today possess more than 700 Fayum portraits. Okay, so I want you to take this in. 700 Fayum portraits. That's a lot. Okay, given that most of us have probably seen the same 24 over and over. There are some 130 examples in North America, including large and noteworthy collections in Berkeley, New York, Toronto, and Boston, as well as a group of important portraits acquired in recent years by J. Paul Getty Museum, and that's the people who have kind of sanctioned this paper. Less than 24 portraits have been received before 1887. Earmark that, guys. Less than 24 portraits had been received before 1887. So remember, it was the early 19th century that first one was found, the one that we just looked at. And by 1887, they had less than 24. So, you know, we're talking about in the early 20s. And these few had attracted little attention, being determined more noteworthy as archaeological curiosities than as significant works of art. So they weren't really paying attention to them. The first known group had been collected in 1615 at Saqqara by Piero della Valle. So there was one. It seems like there was some collected slightly earlier than that early 1800s one, who brought several complete mummies back to Europe in that year. A large group was gathered in the early 1800s. Now this is where I want you to pay attention. By Henry Salt, the British Vice Consul in Egypt. These portraits today are mostly in the Louvre. Various other pieces found their way into European museums over the years, usually as souvenirs or curiosities purchased by travellers to Egypt. One such portrait, for example, now at Florence, had been bought in Egypt by an Italian tourist in 1829, but these early recoveries totaled only a handful of Fayum portraits. Now, bear with me, guys, because we're gonna get there now. We're gonna start to move towards there. So this over here is a map of the Fayum, okay? And a lot of people sometimes think the Fayum is just kind of like this. Where's my mouse? Here it is. It's just this kind of like oasis area, but it's actually the entire Fayum area is considered as kind of ranging from that Fayum area right to the Nile. So Abu Sir El Malik is classified as you can see here. This is where they did the study where they pulled up all of those mummies for those DNA tests that all of the Eurocentrists went crazy for and made those totally unjust conclusions from. But you can see Abu Sir Al Malik. This is where the tomb is located here. Here is the town of Arsinoe and so on. So there's different places throughout the Fayum. Okay. Let's read. Okay. So map of the Fayum with fine spots of portraits indicated in black. So you can see the spots here. Abu Sir Al Malik was one of the places where they found the Fayum portraits. Teb Tunis, so on, so on. So you can see these black spots here is where they found various different Fayum portraits. Now, this is what I wanted to come on to. Then in 1887, the Viennese, Viennese antiquities dealer Theodore Graf purchased through an agent at Cairo and brought back to Egypt a very large number of panel portraits that had been recovered in Bedouin salt miners working at Rubaiyat. So this is where your spidey senses should really start tingling, if they weren't tingling already. In the northeastern Fayum, a site that seems to have served as a burial ground for the inhabitants of the ancient city of Philadelphia. A year or two later, about 90 of these panels were put on traveling exhibition. For sale in both Europe and America, whence a number of portraits passed into North American collections. The remainder of Theodore Graf's collection included at least 200 portraits, more portraits, so 100 plus 200, we're talking about 300 portraits now, were sold at auction during the 1930s after his death. One of this latter group in the Getty collection. So we've got this guy, Graf, who essentially manages to unearth just limitless number of these portraits, and he's being paid very, very handsomely for them. Okay? He's getting a lot of money. 300 portraits were up to now, very, very suddenly from around 25 up until 1887. The sudden appearance in 1887 of hundreds of these painted panels aroused some suspicion. So you can see here, this isn't some kind of like, oh, conspiracy theory. You're just kind of pulling stuff out there. There's nothing for you to, you're clutching at straws, King. No, this is something that, once again, things don't arouse suspicion when there's nothing suspicious going on. Just to be clear, Nefertiti's bust aroused suspicion because it was suspicious. Okay? Joseph's bust didn't, or statue never aroused suspicion because there's nothing suspicious about it. Yeah? These are the things. The statue of Rahatep and Nofret aroused suspicion because they're suspicious. Okay? The King Tutankhamun's tomb didn't arouse anything suspicious because there was nothing suspicious about it. Can you see? So when there's suspicion, guys, it's normally a red flag that something's going on. That's the experts basically saying, this is a bit weird. Were the portraits authentic, or was Graf perhaps a clever swindler, a master of fakery? Okay, bear in mind, guys, I'm not reading from an Afrocentric blog here. Yeah, I'm not reading. This isn't confirmation bias. This is just, these are people who actually own some of these Fayum mummies. But in early 1888, a few months after Graf's acquisition, the great British Egyptologist Flinders Petrie, the racist, began excavations on the site of Hawara, also in the Fayum, which seems to have been the cemetery used by the important ancient town of Arsinoe. This excavation yielded about 90 complete mummies, with portraits thereby supporting the authenticity of the Graf collection. So this is where it gets very interesting. So now, basically, Petrie's done a dig. He's brought up 90 more mummies, and they've all got the portraits on them that look just like Graf's ones. So then you go, okay, cool. We can dust our hands. No mystery here. No one's lying. Everyone's telling the truth. That would be the case if the Fayum portraits matched the individuals in the coffins. Then you could say, okay, cool. There's no skullduggery. Fayum portraits are real. Like I said, I've got no problem with that. But the problem comes when you start to realize there's a little bit of Eurocentrism going along. Okay, so please do, guys. I'm not sure how many people with me. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that many. I've got 140 people online. I know this is going to be read heavy, but bear with me because it's an interesting story, and I kind of want you to stay with me on this. All right, so we know where we are now. Now, let's actually get into some images and start looking through, because we don't have to read too much more of the story, but I want you to kind of like understand what takes place of each of these. Okay. So let's just read a few more of these. Hundreds of painted portraits from the Roman cemetery at the Fayum site of el-Rubaiyat were acquired by the Viennese antiquities dealer Theodor Graf in 1887, as we said. The painting, dating from the late 2nd century, was amongst many examples sold by Graf to museums and collectors during the years that followed. Encaustic on and this is encaustic on wood. Let's continue. There's a couple more things in this paper. So this is where, well, let me read, because this is where it starts to get interesting. You start to realize that stuff starts to change in some of these. Beginning in the 3rd century AD, tempera came to replace encaustic as the medium favored by the painters. So we're talking now about a change of process, okay? Before they were painted in a certain way, now they have a sudden change and also a change of material that's being used. This portrait of a boy dating from the early 4th century AD illustrates strikingly different visual effects. Now, this is where it gets quite funny, because someone pointed something out, okay? And I hope that you guys, well, maybe would have started to pick up on this. All that happens between this kind of change of technique, you realize there's not been a lot of change of techniques. So they're like, oh yeah, throughout the 1st and 2nd century AD, they all used this material. But the one thing they don't actually talk about is the fact that throughout the 1st, 2nd, and some of the 3rd century, all of the ones dated at that time, they all look like they've been painted by the same person. And that's a massive issue. They all look like they've been painted by the same artist. And this is something that you have to account for. You can't just say the same, that the painters were all trained to paint exactly the same way. You're looking at these portraits, and when we're talking about them looking like they've been painted by the same person, we're not just talking about the fact that, they use similar paints. We're talking about actual imperfections in that person's ability to paint. An inability to draw eyes, a pair of eyes that look like a pair of eyes. One eye always looks kind of almost significantly different to the next. There's a problem with sizing going on there. There's clear deficiencies and traits that this painter has. They're not a particularly, I'm not going to say they're poor, probably maybe a better painter than me, but they're not a particularly good painter. But you can see quite clearly it's the same painter every single time. There's no way anyone could argue that these are different painters, because remember, we're talking about works that are supposed to not only span the entire Nile from the various points that they've told us that they picked these up from across the Fayum, up and down the Nile, but also spanning several hundreds of years, okay? And yet they all look like they're painted by the same person. So when you start to put that into logical perspective, people, when we start to put that into logical perspective, and it will come to this a little bit later when we have a little bit of a chat, it's like, when were these painted? Did people just have these paintings hanging around waiting to die? Did they all, when they thought they were going to die, did they all, I think I'm going to die next week, call, whatever I don't know a Greco-Roman name, call Fistius, the painter, and tell him to come and take my portrait. I feel like I'm going to die next week. Like, what, you try, what would be the rationale for painting a child, for instance, and just having a portrait of a child ready before a child? It's like there's there's some real logical kind of question marks that need to be addressed and answered here in terms of the Fayum portraits. So anyway, the point I was making is that when we move on to this new technique, I don't see a new technique. I just see a different forgery, a different forger, essentially. Okay, and there's not many of them. There's not like a massive amount of them, but you've got a few, and some of them were accepted as being genuine, and others were actually rejected. And that's what's really interesting. Um, so just to read here, the paint of this tempera portrait from the 4th century AD has worn away, revealing that the artist had been dissatisfied with a previous effort. Unlike the flexible wax-based encaustic medium of the earliest mummy portraits, strokes in tempera paint cannot be changed. Thus, the artist of this portrait simply painted over his first attempt, formerly in a private collection. Okay, so this is the one that they're talking about here. And this one just looks like it's been painted by a preschool. I mean, who would even bother hiring this person? Look at the quality of painting here. At this point, was it you just get your dad to paint it? What's going on here? It's bizarre. Anyway, let's move on because I want to cover a couple more things in this paper. Then I want to kind of move us on to the next one. Okay. Okay. So use of the portraits. So this is where it comes on to what I was just talking about there. Why did they have these paintings hanging around? So this is what the kind of like the acceptable line is. The portrait panels seem often, at least in the early empire, to have been commissioned during one's lifetime and to have hung framed in the house until death. The frame regularly was of the so-called Oxford variety, as illustrated by Petrie. So that's kind of like that Oxford frame. Is that it there? I think that might be it there. Yeah, that's the one. Of the Oxford variety, as illustrated by Petrie. This particular portrait, now in the British Museum, was found still in its frame, which even had a beveled groove for insertion of the glass plate or sliding shutter, or the cord which is displayed holding a portrait in the University Museum. So once again, just they have these hanging around in the house, and then when the person dies, they take them off the wall and they attach them to the coffin. That seems to be. So they commission the painter at some point. Sometimes they just probably had a bad feeling about a child that they had and maybe just had it painted for the... Anyway, let me go on because it takes a little while for me to kind of like get my head around this. After death, the framed portrait was taken down from the wall, and in the case of the Oxford frame, the panel was removed and cut down the upper corners for a better fit within the mummy wrappings. In the case of the gilt stucco frame, it normally was wrapped in the mummy along with the portrait. Then it seems the completed mummy may have been kept around the house for a while as part of the family mummy collection, either until Uncle Claudius became totally ignored or until his mummy became too battered to be respectable. Okay, so that's a little bit of humor they've inserted there. Okay, so let's move on. Now, I'm going to move on to some more controversial things now, because there's a few things that we could cover in this paper that I would like to, and I'm not going to go back and I'm going to regret not covering everything with you. Let's just cover this little part here that says chronology, and then I'm going to take you to some of the retouching that has been done. When first discovered, the portraits were thought by some to be pre-Roman, that is Ptolemaic, in date, but it is now believed that their chronological range extends from Julio-Claudian days, perhaps the 30s AD, sorry, I should say, through the time of Constantine. Local spurs of activity, at least in the Fayum proper, extended into the mid-4th century, but not much beyond. Theodosius seemed to have prohibited the embalming of bodies in AD 392, thus also ending the custom of painted mummy portraits. Okay, so there we have our window from AD 30 to AD 392, a 300-year or 360-year window, roughly. I'm sure everyone's seen this one before. Now, what's interesting is you're gonna find out later that apparently none of these portraits, everyone looked the same on these portraits. So not only do we have a single artist, but we have a single artist reproducing the same paintings over and over again, and families seemingly being okay with that. But let's carry on. The boy in this portrait is identified in the inscription as Eutyches. So once again, this is just re-emphasizing the fact that, and this is the same for all of the Fayum portraits, they all have Greek names. So when people are like, oh, the Fayum portraits, oh, look, they're the real Egyptians, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, these people were Greek. They had Greek culture, they wore Greek clothing, and they had Greek names. They were unashamedly Greek. So whatever it is that's happened to these Fayum portraits, the one thing that's not under dispute is that they're to be identified as Greeks. Okay, Eutyches may have, and they actually tried to argue that one here. It says Eutyches, or however you say that, may have taken this Greek name on manumission, and so was himself not necessarily of Greek heritage. That doesn't make any sense. His former master certainly was Greek. However, as were, to judge by their names, nearly all the subjects of mummy portraits who are identified in accompanying inscriptions. So they've said it there, exactly what I've just said there. They all have Greek names. They all have Greek culture. Although Egypt was owned by Rome, its aristocracy seems to have remained mainly Greek, thanks to nearly 3 centuries of rule by the Ptolemies just before the Roman period. So we're having it there very much confirmed that when you're talking about the Fayum and you're talking about these Fayum portraits, you're definitely dealing with Greeks. Now, this is where we're going to come on to some of the dodgy stuff that goes on. Modern, so over here, you guys, I mean, this looks like a GCSE art project. I'm not going to go in too hard, but come on, this is not good. Okay, this is a fake, and at least this one's actually an acknowledged fake. But this actually starts to talk about now the fact that fakery is widespread when it comes to the Fayum portraits. Okay, so here, modern forgeries of the Fayum portraits are not often so blatant and bizarre as this example. Okay, which appears to have been painted very recently. Many fakes produced by more sophisticated painters earlier in this century are difficult of detection, formerly offered in the European art market. So you can see here there's a clear acknowledgement that not only is fakery widespread in terms of these Fayum portraits, but they also know that a lot of the ones they've taken on as being real, it's very likely that they're fake. And it talks about the fact that in order to support a fake, all you essentially need is an old piece of wood, and that's not hard to get. Because if you've got an old piece of wood, you're essentially got to pass the carbon dating, and they're not hard to get. You just got to go to a tomb, essentially, and you can find piece of wood. You can find existing panels and paint over them, which is precisely what I think was the case that was done with a lot of these Fayum portraits. But let's move on, because there's one in particular that I want you to see. So let's have a read of these 3, and then I want to take you on to another one. But look, this elegant portrait of a lady dating from the early 2nd century AD was recovered by Flinders Petrie again at Hawara. So this is one of the ones that he recovered. A modern coat of wax, probably applied to excavator to protect the painted surface, has discolored and today obscures the paint's original brightness. So this is the ones that Flinders Petrie uncovered. And then this one over here, just to give you the long and short of it, is a restored one. So this is how they found it, and they restored it. And I think that's a very suitable restoration that has taken place there. Okay, I wouldn't argue with that. Or a very suitable restoration. Let's move on. Now I want to show you a less suitable restoration. So let's have a read here. This is very interesting. The reverse of an unfinished portrait from Tebtunist. So this one's towards the south of the Fayum. Shows an artist's sketch, including notations of color that plainly indicates the depiction from life, 3rd century AD. Now, so that's the first one. Okay, move on to the second one over here. Let me just quickly show you them, 'cause I want you to see these and I want you to read. This is quite important. In contrast to examples dating from early empire, which seem to mainly have been intended as literal likeness, reproducing the actual detailed appearance of specific individuals, many late Fayum portraits were based on general facial types. What? What? I'm going to read that again, guys. Many late Fayum portraits were based on general facial types. What do you mean, general facial types? What does that mean? let me show you what that means. Nearly a duplicate. So this one here, the next one, nearly a duplicate of the preceding example. This depiction was painted by the same artist. We know that, because we talked about that, in a series of portraits based on general facial type. What do you mean? You're just trying to make it sound like a thing. Oh, well, by the mid by the mid 3rd century AD, they just decided to start just doing portraits based on. I'm sorry. Let me just scroll up so you guys can see what I'm talking about here. These were found on different coffins. Can you see a problem here, guys? Can you see a problem here, guys? These were found on different coffins. Okay? So essentially, we got 2 possibilities here. And there's only 2 here. One is the possibility they just spoke about, is that people just accepted the fact that you'll put general facial types. So when they did these little funerals at home, they've got a painting of someone who looks nothing like the person who's just died, and everyone in the family is absolutely fine with that. Oh, it's a general facial type, everyone. No worries, sit down. It's general facial type. We've accepted it. It's fine. Yeah, that's possibility number 1. Okay. Possibility number 2 is that you've got a forger who's incredibly lazy and only has a few models. Yeah. And is basically reproducing these en masse and hoping to sell these to different museums, different collectors, who hopefully are not going to be in a position to cross-reference the fact that they're just basically duplicating the same paintings over and over again. General facial types is not something that I think I've ever heard in the history of portraiture. And the fact that they try and say that like it's just like a thing, it's not a thing. Okay, I told you this gets gets weird, this whole thing. Okay, let me now scroll down to another one that you're gonna find very interesting. So here's another one that you're gonna find very interesting. Okay, guys. So I want you to have a look at this face over here. Okay, hope you can see that nice and clearly. And then I want you to have a look at this face over here to the right. Okay, so you can see them both to the left and to the right. Let's have a read. Let's have a read. See what's going on here. The subject of this portrait from Antinolopolis, gosh, painted in encaustic on linen. Yes, on linen, holds a bouquet and chalice, evidently of funerary connotation. Although the portrait had been restored extensively, okay, so what you just saw there is a restoration, guys. Several distinctive features of the artist's style can be identified. The subject's lips are large and flesby. So wait a second. The subject's lips being large and fleshy. Sorry, not flesby. 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 The subject's lips being large and fleshy is now being attributed to the artist's style. The artist's style. It says several distinctive features of the artist's style. The subject's lips are large and fleshy. Maybe the subject's lips are large and fleshy because the subject had large and fleshy lips. But no, that's been attributed to the artist's styles. So when you attribute it to the artist's style, you can temper it, you can change it if you want to, because hey, he was just exaggerating the lips. Does this sound familiar, guys? Whenever you see big lips in ancient Kemet, yeah. Anytime you see a broad nose in ancient Kemet, it's the artist's style, it's artistry, it's never portraiture. His ears are especially prominent, and a heavy shadow underlies the right eye, with his big fingers, moreover, seem to bend naturally at the joints. The artist's keen sense for framing is apparent in the blah, 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 blah. So why did I read that? The same portrait before restoration, while some original details were altered. Why? By repainting, most features of the artist's style were reproduced accurately. Let's have a look and see what features they changed. Any guesses here? So, large fleshy lips. Yeah, can we all see that? Can we see the size of the lips here? Very large fleshy lips. Whoops. Deselect. Ooh, what am I doing? Stop it. Oh man, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, go on. But if you look over here, look how much they thin. He basically has no lips. He's gone from having very large prominent lips here to the restoration, no lips. Okay. I mean, they've just changed the portrait to match what they want. I mean, does this look familiar? Does this look like something that we normally go through in portraiture, in whitewashing, we would call this? Yeah. This clearly, to me, is a black person. Okay. I'm looking at a black person, very much a Nubian. This image here, I'm looking very much at a modern Egyptian, and they knew what they were doing here. Why would they restore it from this to this? Why would that be done? That's very bizarre. I mean, we know why it's been done, but there's a lot going on here, guys. I know your brains must be in meltdown because mine is just reading this. I'm trying to think if there's anything. I mean, there's this whole paper is very interesting, and I would encourage you all to read it. But I'm gonna move on now. I'm just trying to think if there was anything else. We've kind of covered the main crux of it. There is other stuff. There's stuff that comes out kind of throughout this, but we got a lot to cover, and this is only kind of like the tip of the iceberg. All right, so I'm just gonna give you the name of the paper. If you want to go away and read that in your own time, I'd encourage you to. Mummy Portraits in the J. Paul Getty Museum. It's a free download. You should be able to find it quite easy. Have a read of it because it's very interesting, and by the end of reading it, you'll kind of understand what the Fayum Portraits are. Now, let's get on. I want to move on to some good stuff now. So I'm going to move on to this part. Let's do the good part now. All right, so those of you with me last week, okay, Carolyn Wilkinson, who is a facial reconstruction artist, okay? Let's just go through. She's carried out reconstructions basically on 4 mummies, okay? So 4 mummies she's carried out reconstructions on. And this is going to be a brief read. We shouldn't take too long for us to kind of get through this. I'm going to read through as much of it as I feel is necessary, but I think it's really important. And when you get through, you're going to have a look at the reconstructions, and then I'm going to let you draw your own conclusions based on what you see, okay? For nearly a century, Egyptian mummy portraits have been blah, 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 blah. I'm going to skip over that. So we'll start here. As with many scientific assessments of Egyptian mummies, we can turn to forensic techniques to help solve the mystery of these enigmatic portraits. 3-dimensional facial reconstruction has been used for the past 25 years in Britain for forensic identification from skeletal remains, and recently several studies have been carried out using facial reconstruction to assess the accuracy, time of production and artistic techniques of the mummy portraits. It has been estimated that there are more than 1,000 mummy portraits, but fewer than 100 are still bound to their mummies. Okay, It is possible to reconstruct the face of an individual onto the dry skull, and a technique was pioneered in Manchester primarily by Richard Neve. Now, guys, I'm not going to go into the technique too much because hopefully those of you who were here for my last live stream will remember it. But essentially, I'm going to give a bit of an overview. I'll read from here and then I'll recap it afterwards. His method relied upon the skeletal structure of the skull of the recreation of the facial musculative and therefore the facial form. Alternatively, the North American method, as developed primarily by Krogman and Gatliff, sorry, I'm squinting my eyes here, relied upon sets of mean facial tissue depth. So remember this, guys, and anatomical points over the surface of the skull. So just to give a quick overview, what they do is they have loads of different ethnic groups, okay, where they've done basically average face sampling across ethnic groups, okay, and then based on feedback that they're given, someone will tell them, or maybe by their own kind of analysis, it all depends on who's setting the agenda, as we spoke about last time. They'll say, you need to use this ethnic group's tissue data in order to produce your reconstruction. And then they'll have certain distances they will move from certain points on the skull to be able to recreate the face. That's kind of like a long and a short of the approach that's taken here. Okay. Where's my mouse point? Here it is. Which related to the sex, age, and racial origins of the specimen. So that's kind of what I was just explaining there. The Manchester method uses these tissue depth measurements as guides during the procedure, whilst sculpting the facial muscles one by one onto the skull. Now, in the cases of ancient Egyptians with negroid skulls, okay, so first of all, first thing to point out there, in the case of ancient Egyptians with negroid skulls, what's the first thing that you read into there, guys? It's being acknowledged that they have several ancient Egyptian skulls that are negroid. Okay, something that's not widely accepted or acknowledged. So I'm going to read that again. In the case of ancient Egyptians with negroid skulls. Now, what is a negroid skull, guys? For those of you who perhaps have were in my phenotypic matrix live stream. That's a question I'm actually putting out there for everybody. What is a negroid skull? And I want you to think about true negroid here. True negroid versus true caucasoid. I'm not sure if anyone's going to remember. But I want someone to define for me, what is a negroid skull? I'm going to put the question out there. I think I might be a little bit ahead of you, so I don't mind waiting for a little while because I'd love to get some feedback on this. What is a negroid skull? Feel free to have a guess if you don't know. Dolichocephalic with subnasal prognathism. Yes. I want you to expand on that. But what does it need to do to qualify to be a negroid skull? You are right though. You've put up, say someone else said high prognathism. You're all giving me excellent points about some of the features. But there's a really simple answer of what does a skull need to do to be classified as a negroid skull. Someone else said dolichocephaly. I like the way you spelled it there as well, very creative, with square orbitals and subnasal prognathism. I like it. You're all along the right paths. You're kind of clustering them together. I want a specific answer. I'm being very difficult. What does a skull need to do in order for them to say, this is a negroid? Cranial volume, high cheekbone, someone else said. They made a range with the subnasal prognathism way outside. Macy's kind of got what I was looking for. Okay. What I was looking for, and it was an unfair question. I'm going to admit that, but I'm going to just quickly highlight this answer because it was the one I was looking for. What I was looking for was it needs to fall outside of a range that they can classify as being caucasoid. That's when they'll classify it as negroid. So when it's exhausted, basically, thank you, Nerd Large said it as well. When it's exhausted, all of their possibility of them passing this as being caucasoid, they will classify it as negroid. Them saying, oh, well, skulls that are negroid are we use this data, and skulls that are Caucasoid, we use this data, doesn't mean any of the skulls are Caucasoid or even Eurasian. Skulls that are Negroid are just so far on the black spectrum that they have to say this is a black person, and skulls that they classify as Caucasoid are normally black people with aquiline features. That's it, really. They can, when they see an aquiline feature or a feature they can claim, they'll just claim it and they'll go, oh, yeah, this is a Negroid skull. Okay, so that's really what's going on there. Okay, so yeah, you guys got the picture anyway. A lot of you have put the correct answer in, so thank you, everyone. I went with Macy because she was quickest. So I went there. So let's carry on. Tissue data from Black North Americans. Now I've got an issue with this already. Okay, so look, for skulls that are classified as Negroid, they use tissue data from Black North Americans. So do you remember where I said this is the total lack of appreciation for African phenotypic diversity? And I'm not saying that Black North Americans, I mean, even if you can classify them as a group, there's so much phenotypic diversity amongst Black Americans. Are you kidding me? It sounds like Metatron here. You know what I mean? They just pull out Mahershala Ali and be like, yeah, use his tissue data. You can't have one set of tissue data to classify all of North America, let alone Africa. We're talking about a skull that they found in Egypt here. And they're like, oh, this one's black. All right, use the sample data from from Black North Americans. They didn't even try and be local with it. You know, they have absolutely zero appreciation for the fact that the range of phenotypes within Africa is just massive and broad. No appreciation for it whatsoever. It's it's quite insulting, if we're gonna be totally honest with you. It is very insulting. Dear. Sorry. I'm gonna come back. I just had a super chat, so I'm just gonna read that out really quickly. Hello all from St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, the first people of the Americas. Welcome, Ambush Predator, and thank you very much for your super chat. I much appreciate it. Yeah, so there's that. I'm gonna close the magnifier now because I can actually zoom in on this page, and it'll be a bit easier. So let's carry on. In the cases of ancient Egyptians with Caucasoid skulls, so there it is, guys. There's that phrase that we were just talking about, Caucasoid skulls. What is that? It's nothing. Okay. It's totally meaningless. But anyway, with Caucasoid skulls, tissue data from mixed race Africans or white Europeans are used. So what's the acknowledgement that's being made here, guys? It's exactly what I just said, isn't it? Okay. Negroid means so far off the black scale that we're going to use Black Americans data, to tissue data to create the reconstruction. Caucasoid means the full range. So Caucasoid is not, they haven't said, oh, ones that are Caucasoid, we're going to use data from the UK. They haven't got, with Caucasoid, it's like they accept this massive phenotypic range when it comes to Caucasoid. So it could be mixed race Africans, could be North Africans, could be another. First of all, what is mixed race African? I'm actually really questioning what they mean there. Are they talking about Nilotic Africans when they say mixed race Africans? This is so loaded. Sorry, it's just man. These lot are just they're insane with it. Let's carry on. The origins, attachments, and strength of each muscle and the details of the facial features can be determined from the skeletal structure. Okay, I'm going to move on now to the good part here. Oh no, I just want to read this part as well. The unit of art in medicine at the University of Manchester has a 75% success rate with identification following forensic facial reconstruction, and has carried out many laboratory studies into the accuracy of the technique. Now, this is a whole bunch of... Now, obviously, I'm not going to... I always say this. It sounds like I've got a soft spot for Caroline Wilkinson. I don't really. But she's selling her business here, obviously. This is a paper that she's written and she's trying to justify, hey, we can be trusted because this, that, and the other. That 75% success rate is a load of baloney. This is not double-blind tests that she's carrying out there. That basically says someone does, and you're going to see it later, actually. If you stay on with me, you're going to see later when we look at the specific reconstruction of a mummy child that was done. Um, they're given the date, they're given the skull, they're given the tissue data. They say make it look like this, and then they create the reconstruction. And then after they've created the reconstruction, they're given an actual photo of the person. They say, okay, now you can add the skin color and the hair to it, and kind of like make those specific. And then after that's all been done, then it's matched with the photo and put in front of someone. And they go, oh yeah, this kind of looks like the person. And they'll do a ratio. If people say it looks like the person, then they'll be classified as part of that 75%. If they say it doesn't look like the person, then basically they won't be. So it's a confidence rating. It's not 75% success rate. This is not how it's done. Okay, so this is being totally overblown here. This is a confidence rate based on basically on almost guided exercise to make something look like something else, just like we saw with the Richard III reconstruction. So remember how the Richard III reconstruction looked nothing like Richard III, but they were given tissue data. She knew what she needed to make it look like, and then she shoved the Richard III's wig on it and then put it in front of the Richard III Society. There is one in the UK, and they were like, yes, we approve this. Yes, we like this. 80% of us approve this work. This is brilliant stuff, Caroline. That's basically how it works. Yeah, so there's no this isn't, don't read too much into this. The results suggest that it's possible to recreate the face of an individual that could be recognized by a relative or close friend. That's a big stretch. Anyway, let me carry on because we're going to get to the reconstructions now. Yeah, let's just get down to them. I bet you guys want to see them. So we're going to get down to them now. So I'm going to read. I need to read up from here. The reconstructions of the British Museum mummies showed strong similarities to the portraits with many consistent features. Yeah, I want you to read that. That's what she says here. Yeah, particularly at the mouths, noses, and facial proportions of 1A and 1B. So she thinks 1A and 1B are a really strong similar match. So I'm going to show you first of all. This is 1A and this is 1B. Now, to me, if I was to cover up that person who kind of looks, very like, definitely could pass for Ethiopian. Like a modern kind of like Habesha, Yemeni. Yeah. So essentially does look like a black person, but this still looks like a different person to me. And it's not like, I'm not expecting to look exactly the same, but when I'm talking about different person, I'm talking about we can see the prognathism there. There's not much prognathism in the portrait. The lips are very similar, so I like that. Okay, and I would say I'll give her it in the closeness of the eyes. That's quite fair. But the shape of the face, the zygomatic projection, everything's different. There's a clear kind of forward angle to this face. Now, this one to me is even worse. These two look nothing alike. You guys need to, I don't want to feed anything to anyone, but take away this hairstyle that they've put on it to match. Clearly, everything's been done within their power to match the portrait. Remember what I said before? So they do the tissue data and everything. First of all, they're given the population to match the tissue data with. So she's being told, here's a skull, Northern Egyptian tissue data, please, because we need to look like a Northern Egyptian. They go and they plunk all the features on, this, that, and the other. And then after it's done, they say, oh, by the way, you did that blinded, but now here's the portrait. Add the hair, add the makeup, add everything to make it look. No one would ever guess these two people are even from the same nation, let alone the same family. The facial projections of this person scream out African to me. And you know why I'm saying that. Just looking at the shape of this skull, that screams African to me. And if they had used tissue data from the Black North American, if they had used tissue data from any black group or any African group, they would have got something that looked. This is giving me that weird Botoxy vibe that I was getting from the Nefertiti KV35 younger lady reconstruction. there's suppression even with the size of the lips here. You just feel like they wanted to make the lips bigger and they couldn't because they were using that kind of like Lower Egypt tissue data. So they had to kind of suppress the size of the lips. The only thing that's similar is the hairstyles. These two look nothing alike, and the unibrow. But you've added all that based on the portrait. Nothing about this portrait looks like this portrait to me. This is a flat-faced person. Now, once again, we're dealing with one reconstruction. I mean, one artist here in the Fayum. They all look the same. Someone's pointed that out. All these Fayum portraits look like they're painted by the same artist. So you can see he could never draw two eyes quite the same. Look, you can see it here. One side of the face is always slightly different to the second side. Like, I mean, it's not a very good artist. I mean, he was under a lot of pressure to make 200 portraits in a very short space of time. But the point of the matter is, the fact that they've been so desperate as to say these look like the people shows you what level of kind of dishonesty we're dealing with here. Let me continue reading. The comparison of the reconstruction, I haven't even got to the worst part yet, of the glyptotech mummy suggested some inconsistencies. The portrait and reconstruction were very different in facial features and proportions and appear to show individuals of different ages and racial origins. So at least here, there has been an acknowledgement that there's a difference in racial origins. The reconstruction of the Metropolitan mummy also appeared to show inconsistencies to the portrait, but these differences were subtler. They're not subtler. I'm going to show you in a minute. The facial proportions and many facial features matched closely, but the portrait revealed the face of a somewhat younger man with a narrower nose. Do you want to have a look at the Glyptotech and the Metropolitan Museum mummy? Let me scroll down and show you. So this is the first one. What the hell? Guys, come on. All right, sorry. Everyone's trying to get my attention. Sorry. What's going on? Oh, okay. Take down donations. Sorry, guys. Yeah, okay, cool. I can do that. Let me scroll up. Forgive me. And I need to check a donation as well. Thank you very much to Soul Poster. You haven't put a comment, so I'm just going to flash you on the screen so everyone can see. Thank you, Soul Poster, for the $10 donation. It would be useful if there was a buzzer to get my attention. Sorry, guys. All right. I've taken it off the screen now. Was there anything else that was taking your kind of like attention? I think, okay, so you can't see. So mostly we were just complaining about not being able to see. That's fine. You can see now. Everyone okay? Yeah? All right, cool. So we looked at A and B. So this is A and B. Okay. This is C and D. So this is the Glyptotech one, and this is the Metropolitan Museum. I'm sorry. No. Okay. There is no way on God's green earth that a person who looked like that at any stage in life could have ever looked like that. And it's this, I mean, this one's even worse. They said this one was subtler. To me, this one is the worst. This one, you know, this reconstruction reminds me of. Have you guys seen the Trolls movie? Sorry, I'm showing that I got kids now. Yeah. You know, Justin Timberlake's character. That's what this one reminds me of. This one does. I mean, this is what happens when you try and force tissue data. Yeah. You're trying to force tissue data that doesn't fit. So this is, they've got this skull. They've obviously been told we need Egyptian, you know, Northern Egyptian tissue data, which they've done. They've put it on. But the features of the skull was so African. Even with that tissue data, it still came out looking like a black person. They even tried to force it with the hair. Like, they really tried to pull all the stops to make these look like they are not this. Guys, am I going crazy here? Seriously, this is not. You know, it's funny. Someone posted in my comments today. I was doing those kind of, and I've been posting those lookalikes in the community section. And someone posted to me, "Oh, this is not scholarship." And I was like, "Oh, shut up, you idiot!" Oh, this is not scholarship. I was like, it is scholarship actually, because actually, when I do my comparisons, I'm looking at things like the maxillary region, the zygomatic projection. I'm looking at the orthognathic prognathism. I'm looking at the level of dolichocephaly. I'm looking at the breadth of the skull. So actually, it's very, very scholarly. I'll tell you what's not scholarly. This is not scholarly. Just because something exists in a paper, okay, just because something's been peer reviewed, it doesn't make it good scholarship. This is a veritable joke. Seriously, guys. This is a joke. This is for none of these and this is my issue. This is why this is called Fayum or Facum. The Fayum mummies do not match the portraits. What's going on? What's going on, guys? I don't know what's going on here, because I'm being honest with you, this is throwing me through a loop, because I went into this whole thing with the Fayum. I've always been okay with the Fayum portraits. Like I said at the very start of the stream, I was like, Fayum portraits. Now I think they're all fake. I've already shown you from the previous paper that they've taken black people and they've restored / repainted them to make them look white. They've got mummies in there that are clearly black African, and I mean like properly black African mummies sitting within these coffins, which I always thought were full of Greeks. So then it kind of begs the question, what race were the Greeks? Or at least there's so many question marks flying around here. But this, you can't ignore this. Anyone who kind of like leans on the fact that the Fayum mummies are the true depiction of Egyptians or whatever, you cannot ignore this data. You can't. You can't ignore this data. This is completely debunking the reality of these Fayum portraits. There's a clear divergence. There's a massive, massive issue that needs to be kind of like addressed here. All right. I could go into the technicals of this, but there's another paper that I want to get into. There's another paper. Thank you very much. Before I jump into there, Stephen, really appreciate you. Sorry, guys, I'm covering the screen again. Thank you once again for your critical analysis. You are one of YouTube's greatest educators. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Really, really appreciate that. Brings a smile to my face. I've been getting trolled quite a lot today, so it's nice to hear some positive reinforcement from you guys. So yeah, much appreciated, man. Thank you very much, Stephen. I really appreciate it. The donation will go a long way. So yeah, I mean, there's a huge issue here. There's a huge issue. I mean, here's another one, guys. I don't need to go into this. Once again, remember, we're looking at Egyptian tissue data here. Okay? Model of the head and face of Marina mummy. Okay? We're looking at Egyptian tissue data here, and it still ends up looking African. So the question mark is here. It's very, very, there's a big issue that they need to deal with here. It's really, yeah, there's something going on. So yeah, it's there. There's a, now I'm not done yet. There's one more paper that I wanted to go through, and this one's quite in depth, but this one has the most useful information. So I hope you haven't tuned out. If you manage to stay tuned in this long, please make sure you stay for the remainder of this. We've only got one more paper to go through, but this one's really, really useful. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to take you to an article. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is take you to where is it? Yes, here. I want to take you to a online article. Okay. And it's the usual propaganda, but let's read it together. I'm going to zoom in a bit, and I'm going to take Stephen. So I'm just going to take your comment off the screen because I don't have a buzzer sounding, and I know people got really frustrated last time. All right, so let's zoom in a bit here. Okay, so facial reconstruction. I've already spoiled it. I've posted the spoiler already. What's going on? Why has my screen gone black? Come back. This website. This website's really rubbish. Got loads of crap on it. Facial reconstruction reveals Egyptian mummy portrait was accurate except for one detail. First of all, spoiler alert, it's not accurate. Okay, and you can see there's clearly more than one detail wrong with this, guys. You guys can already see what's going on here. Okay, you guys can already see what is going on here, but we're gonna break down this reconstruction in a second. Just after the turn of the first millennium AD, a young child living in Egypt contracted deadly illness, most likely pneumonia, and died. His tiny body was prepared for mummification and burial. Some of his organs were removed, his remains were wrapped in crisscross linen bindings, and a portrait of his face was affixed to the front of his mummy. The so-called mummy portrait was part of a popular tradition um, among some Egyptians in Greco-Roman times. Okay, we're not paying attention to that. We know they weren't Egyptian. From about the 1st through the 3rd centuries AD. But how accurate were these portraits? So, the results showed that a portrait was fairly accurate except for one aspect. The artist made the youngster look older than 3 to 4 years. That's not the only problem. I don't know what kind of blinkers this person's looking through. The portrait shows older traits, which may have been the result of an artistic convention at the time. Study-led researcher Andreas Nerlich. Study lead researcher. I was thinking, what doesn't read right? Study lead researcher Andreas Nerlich, the director of the Institute of Pathology at the academic clinic Munich. Blah 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 blah. This single portrait, however, doesn't reveal whether it was a common practice for ancient Egyptians to make younger people look older in their mummy portraits. Now, this article goes on, but the reason I wanted to show you this article before I went into the deeper paper was to show you the level of delusion that exists when they really want something to be true. Because if I just scroll up, that does not look like that. This child does not look like this mummy portrait. They do not look the same. Okay? And the reason they don't look the same is because I'm going to show you in a moment that the child's skull is clearly, in fact, I'm just going to close this website down because it's really doing my head in. The child's skull is clearly an African skull. Okay? We'll come back to that later. So this is a paper on it, and this paper was actually really interesting and really packed with information. So I want you to kind of like stay with me, all right? Jonathan, we're just getting into paper reading now. Thank you for your $5 donation, brother. I appreciate you. You're going to like it from where you're jumping in now because we're literally about to dive into a paper. I know that's like your favorite pastime. So yeah, let's go. And someone just said there, I'm sorry I have to say this, Fanny, that is exactly, honestly, you said, dang, even the baby. This, honestly, that's exactly how I felt. I swear that is exactly how I felt when I read this article and what I went through. It's like, wow, even children aren't sacred for these forgers and these thieves. Like you can't even let a child in their resting place. You got to change the image of a child. It's heartbreaking. So yeah, it's really bad. It's really, really bad. Let me jump in anyway. Okay. So actually, I'm going to pull up my notes here because I've already marked on something else, the paragraphs that I want to jump through with you guys. So just bear with me. It's take me 10 seconds. Otherwise, we'll end up reading the whole paper and we ain't got time for that. Give me 1 second, guys. Just pulling up my notes. Okay. So I want to dive in from, well, let's start from the start and then we're going to jump a paragraph and carry on from there. So in Greco-Roman times, in the Lower Egyptian Fayum region, a painted portrait was traditionally placed over the face of the deceased individual. The mummy portraits show considerable individual diversity. Gonna skip over. We know all this, so we don't need to read too much because we've already done a bit of reading. Okay, so from here, the infant mummy. So this is where it gets specific, okay? The mummy is part of a collection of the Stalices Museum Egyptus, blah, 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 where it is registered under the number blah blah blah. It has been housed there since 1912, when the famous Egyptologist Sir Flinders Petrie, who I think is guilty of a lot of these crimes, and I'm not going to hide that. I think everything that he's uncovered should be brought into question. Donated the mummy to the Royal Bavarian Collection of Antiquities. The records of this object indicate Sir Petrie had discovered the mummy in the 1880s in a cemetery close to the Pyramid of Hawara. Okay, so this is one of that large find that he found, which justified the earlier find. The mummy portrait shows an infant with curled hair woven in 2 strands running from the crest to the ears. The individual has large eyes of brown colour, a long thin nose, and a small mouth with full lips. A necklace with a small medallion hangs around its neck. The skin colour was evaluated using the dermatological skin colour scale by Fitzpatrick. This grading system describes the human skin colour in 6 types. Within this system, the portrait belongs to a skin type 4 skin colour. Okay, so isn't it funny how they can get really technical when it comes to skin colour when they're trying to describe a Eurasian? Yeah, have you ever seen a paper when they're looking at ancient Egyptian artwork, paintings of ancient Egyptians, portraits, statues of ancient Egyptians, where they're like, oh, the bust of Queen T can be described as a type 1 skin type, being that she's very have you ever seen that? No. It's amazing how they have different standards when it comes to justifying their presence in places that they don't belong. It's just amazing. CT scan. In order to find out more about the individual, the mummy was thoroughly investigated using a full body CT scan. Okay. I don't need to go into any more detail there. And let's just see which paragraph. We know the process, so I don't need to go into that. I just want to get into the part where it gets interested. So let's read from here. Here it is. So in the next step, we applied skin color. Okay, no, let's read from here. Sorry. The facial form is predominantly determined by soft tissue. So we know how this works now, guys. The thickness of the soft tissue layer was reconstructed according to the data given by Mannheim, which was established reference values for infantile facial soft tissue for Caucasians between 3 and 8 years of age. So they've made it very clear that they're using Caucasian tissue data set, as we already knew. Okay? This decision was probably made based on the appearance of the mummy portrait and not on the measurements of the skull, because you're going to see the skull in a moment. It's clearly not a Caucasian skull. This data was collected by means of ultrasound scans on living individuals. Beyond the data for the face, the residual skull data, including the crest, were defined according to the skull bone morphology. Okay, so once again, that's just basically saying using those little pins, you're putting them on the different parts of the skull in order to work out tissue depth based on the data set that you've applied. In the mandibular region, a mean soft tissue cover was assumed in line with early infantile face profiles. Here, slightly interpretive adjustments were added. Take that in, guys. Slightly interpretive adjustments were added to the raw data to include presumed slightly higher fat pads in infantile age. The width of the orifice was determined by the position of the canine teeth, which also determines the shape of and the width of the lips. In the next step, we applied skin color in accordance with the color determination by the dermatological scale as indicated above. So remember, they said it was type 4. Besides the color, the 3D skin material is also made of multiple textures, defining the reflections of the fine details. On the lips, nose, and ears, a slight translucency effect. In order to avoid bias, pay attention, guys. I'm going to highlight that. In order to avoid bias, because we've done such a good job with that so far, the facial reconstruction artist was carefully kept away from images of specific information concerning the portrait. So, guys, this is to be clear, yeah? We're avoiding bias by making sure that the facial reconstruction artist doesn't see the portrait. But the facial reconstruction artist has been given the skull, has been told the ethnicity of the skull, has been told the tissue data to use on the skull. Has been told. So they've already effectively been told what to create. Okay? They've already been told what to create. And there's not, I mean, it's like, you haven't just given them the skull and say, here's a skull, we're not going to tell you anything about it, have at it. You've absolutely loaded them with data that they need. And then you're going to see it gets even funnier than that. So yeah, just to make sure we avoided bias, we did that. Only at the aforementioned last stage of the reconstruction were the color of the eyes, hair, as well as type of hairstyle communicated. So it's like, what the freak? There's nothing unbiased about this process. Okay. You gave them data, you gave them a skull, you said make it look like an Egyptian, use the Egyptian tissue data, you know, put all that stuff around there, okay, make sure the features fall into this box. And then at the end, when they'd created something and it looked nothing like the Fayum mummy portrait, you were like, okay, and here's a photo, by the way, so stick some hair on, stick some color on. What the heck, man? This is not. What are they trying to communicate here? Sorry, I'm rambling. In order to assume that assure that the data for these three features would match, hairstyle, eye color were manually corrected to conform with the information received. So yeah, just make sure it really, really, really matched. Okay. So when you're looking at that, just to scroll back up again, you are looking at a genuine best effort to make it match. Yeah. Like this is like, make it absolutely match this. Yeah, there's nothing double blind about this process that they've done. This is fully visual. Let me now scroll down to an important part. We don't need to read all that. Is this one more? Okay, so this is read this. The CT data for the skull allowed for virtual reconstruction of the face. Here's the skull, guys, that I wanted you guys to see. Okay, I'm going to zoom in here. All right. Now, this is the skull of an African child. Okay. One of the key kind of very African features that you get, children and adults, is cool. One of the key things that you get, children and adults, is if you look at this kind of like tilt, for want of a better word, of the orthognathic region. So you see the maxillary has this kind of forward slant from the bottom of the nose. It doesn't just fall straight down. It kind of comes forward. That is a very African trait. Okay? That kind or that type of subnasal prognathism is very specifically African, that trait. This is something that you see constantly amongst Nilotic Africans, okay? And I just want to kind of give you some examples of what that kind of looks like in life. Someone said beanhead. Aren't they all? But look, it sounds a bit mean that that you said beanhead, but I just want to give some examples of what you're looking at in terms of that skull. Don't need that. Let's close that really quickly. Okay. This is kind of what you're going to be looking at in terms of a skull like that. Okay. That is a very African skull. That is not, there's no way, shape or form that's a Eurasian skull. Okay. Look at the size. Look at, even this is a child. Look at the width of the nasal passage. Okay. Look at the width of the nasal passage. That nose would have been much wider, but they were using Egyptian tissue data once again, so they had to they were making it as narrow as possible. Okay, these are the kind of faces that you're going to be expecting from a skull like that. Okay, some Nubian boys here. Okay, you can see this is what is consistent. Okay, with what you're looking at there. What they've tried to portray there is just bizarre. It doesn't match any way, shape or form. Okay, it doesn't match at all. And that's why it has so many weird traits. So if I just, in fact, let me just pull up their reconstruction, because we'll come onto some of this in a bit, but I wanted to kind of show some things that make this very erroneous. Sorry, 1 second, I've lost my comments. Make sure you're all there. So I'm just going to zoom in. So first of all, well, we're going to come onto some of the conclusions in a moment, but there it is. You can see it from front view. Look at the width of that nose. The nose should never be narrower than the nasal passage. The nostrils should always flare slightly outside of that nasal cavity. They haven't done that in this occasion in their desperation to make it look like something that's not African. Tell me how that skull equates to this person. You can't tell me that. It just doesn't. It's absolutely, this is not right. And even so, they knew from certain widths. So the canines, I think, are the teeth where they judge how wide the mouth is going to be. So you can see from the canines, they had to make the mouth wider. Look how narrow this mouth is over here. And they had the nerve to say, oh yeah, this really matches. It doesn't match at all. Even after they've tried to make it fit this as much as possible, it looks nothing like it. This is clearly an African child. Okay. Let me just quickly close that, because I want to read some more important parts that are in this paper that I haven't got to yet. So you can see there with the nose that they're using, that is too narrow for the nasal passage. So I just want to kind of get to the part where I want to read. The facial reconstruction shows a child with typical infantile features, very similar to those of the portrait. No. On the biometrical level. So this is where you're going to see them actually trying to convince you, lying to you as they're giving you the data. Okay. The proportions between the dimensions of the forehead to the eye line. Okay. So forehead to the eye line. The distance of the lower nasal aperture and the mouth opening were exactly the same between the portrait and the reconstruction. No, they're not. One of the biggest problems you can see with their reconstruction, which they've tried to hide, and I don't know why they would even say it. So I've just done a closer up here. You can see straight away this maxillary region over here, this distance from the mouth to the bottom of the nose is far greater than it is. But the way they try to do it with this portrait, first of all, they've made it slightly larger, so it kind of like hides or reduces that distance, because the portrait is larger. If you look at where the chin is, the chin should be up here. So the chin, they've moved down at least a centimeter here. This is where the bottom of the chin is on the portrait, and they've moved the chin up here. So they've tried to be really slick with it. This portrait clearly has a larger chin area and a much smaller maxillary region, much smaller. This one is large, this is long, and the top lip should be bigger to compensate for how large that region is. This nose is smaller, and one of the ways you can see if the nose is smaller is you take that measurement between the eyes, okay? You take that distance, and then you take it in ratio to the distance from the nose bridge to the bottom of the nose. So you can see with this one, it's like a 1 to 1.5 ratio, I would say. So distance between the eyes to down here is about a 1.1 to 1.5 ratio. But if you look at their one, you're talking about 1 to 2.5. So that nose is much longer than the distance between the eyes. These aren't close. These are not close. It's really, really frustrating that they're trying to sell this to the public as these two. Oh yeah, it doesn't look exactly the same. It doesn't even look nearly the same. They've done their very best to hide African features, and they've done that same thing where they've tilted the skull down as well. So remember when we looked at Tut's skull? They've done the same thing here to hide the prognathism. They've tilted the skull down. Okay, so can you see where the chin is sitting? The chin is sitting like almost in the middle of the neck, okay? Because the chin should be sitting around here, but if they put the chin beneath the forehead like it's supposed to be, it would push the front of the face out and you'd see the prognathism. So they've done that whole tilty thing again. And this is the point at which I should be kind of start getting really vexed with Carolyn Wilkinson, because she's making a habit out of this now. Actually, this isn't Carolyn Wilkinson's reproduction, actually. This isn't one of hers, so I'll let her off. But you can see they all kind of employ these same really tricky techniques in order to make it fit a narrative that it's not supposed to fit. This is all just like, it's really, it's really quite. I don't know how to even describe it anymore. Let me go through to the comments, because it's been a while and I haven't looked at them. Commitment to the deception is shameful. It is indeed. They made sure to bring up the long thin nose, small lips. Yeah, you guys can see. Just want to see if there's been any questions that I've missed. You guys can see it all. I'm glad you guys are all noticing those features. You know, the large, large dolichocephalic head, subnasal prognathism, square orbitals. You can see it all. This is just ticking all these boxes. We know we're looking at an African child. It's very sad. Oh, that's a good question. Do the reconstruction correctly? It'll be hard. Be hard. I don't see. The thing is, I don't really believe in blind reconstructions from skulls, if I'm going to be totally honest with you. I think you need some kind of data. It's a massive guessing game. I think the only thing you can get close to is like saying they had roughly these features, but you're never going to get a face that anyone could guess from a skull. You need, but yeah, thank you for putting that kind of thought in my direction, because maybe it's something in the future that we could look towards doing. Who knows? I'm just looking for some important data that I hope I haven't missed. Okay, so I'm going to read a lot from here. Sorry, guys, bear with me because there's a lot of good data in here. So just bear with me. This will take a little bit. Since their first descriptions in 1877 by the Austrian art dealer Theodor Graf, so he's the one that found a million of them, the so-called mummy portraits have been attributed to the funerary practices of a particular group of ancient Egyptians in the Greco-Roman period. The portraits show male, female, juvenile and infantile faces of all age classes except newborns, with very high inter-individual diversity of facial features, but a constant similar pattern of presentation. Same artist. With their head in nearly frontal position and ending at the upper chest. Nearly frontal position, one side of the face not looking the same as the other, eyes slightly squiff. Same artist, like I said before. Every portrait also has individual features beyond the mere face, such as different hairstyles, jewelry, and details of their clothing. Well, not everyone, because we saw duplicates. Plenty of duplicates. Yeah, they said it was... What was their phrase for it? I can't remember their phrase for it, but it was hilarious. Now, despite this circumstantially high degree of individualism in the portraits, it has been a constant matter of debate whether those portraits really represent the deceased or not. This is where it gets interesting. The as yet most extensive study on the subject by Breer and Wilkinson collected 5 cases, that's the one that we looked at earlier, with comparison between the portrait and a facial reconstruction that had been made upon the mummy skull, which was visible due to damage to the mummy bandages. The few cases were reconstructed using mostly a modified method developed by blah 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 in the 1930s. Both the original and the modified method developed by Wilkinson and Neve required a physical skull replica, which is used for the application of the soft tissue layers according to the established values. The replicas in the study had been made either by direct duplication of the osseous skull, or through 3D printing for skulls that had been previously evaluated by CT scanning. In addition to this collection, isolated further reconstructions are available in literature on Egyptian mummies, but also for historic individuals. These previous papers raised the following principal questions. When were the portraits painted? Were they done from life or later, bound into the wrappings of the mummies, or were they done posthumously? I would argue much more posthumously. And probably most importantly, do they really portray the deceased, or are they stylized? The question they haven't asked here is, are they fake, or have they been fabricated or changed? Did they exist, and were they changed in an attempt to? But they're not gonna think that way because they've got no reason to doubt Egyptology the way Africans do. They have no reason to think Flinders Petrie is capable of doing such a thing, even though he was a very clear white supremacist and racist. So this is the thing. Know thyself. Thank you. Yo, what up, fam? Have you seen the reconstruction of the mummy of Tahima's a Nubian priestess? Check it out. Horrible. They use Caucasian data set. For a Nubian, for goodness sake. Yeah, so there you go. Thank you for that, Know Thyself. That's a very generous gift that you've given me there. I really appreciate it. And I will check that out. And by the way, guys, if you're not subscribed to Know Thyself, you need to get over, subscribe. He's got the most fantastic video that's just been posted. I should say he or she. I think they're a company. But either way, video just been posted. Responding to Metatron, called A Message to Metatron. Check it out. It is excellent. Definitely worth your time. But yeah, thank you for that donation. Where was I? So yeah, in contrast, there are several examples where the reconstructed face and the portrait are extremely divergent. We looked at some of those today. Likewise, one of the portraits shows a young man, while the mummy is that of an elderly man with a white beard. In addition, Breers and Wilkinson report one case, the Glyptothex, that's the one that we looked at earlier, I think that was C, yeah, where the reconstruction portrait shows individuals with completely different ancestries. In other words, it was a black man and they had a portrait of a white man. Explain it. While it might be conceivable that adult individuals stored a portrait at home during their lifetimes, which would be later be used as mummy portrait, it is hard to believe that sub-adults and those portraits at hand, since the individual facial features generally evolve rapidly during infancy and adolescence, so that those portraits would have indeed needed to be renewed and adapted every few years. And this is what I was talking about earlier. What's the motive here? Was it like a funeral insurance plan? Like every year you get your portrait done just in case you die? It's bizarre. At the moment, at least, there is no evidence that such a monitoring of a person's appearance was common for Greco-Roman period of ancient Egypt. This in turn strongly suggests that the mummy portraits were made post-mortem, which might be in line with the observations of some portraits that contain sketches of the face on their dorsal side. Okay, so that's like the one we looked at earlier, which was one of the ones that used the common facial types. On the other side, it had a sketch on it. Until now, there have been no comparative studies investigating. I mean, just to go back to that point as well really quickly, that sketch on the dorsal side could have just been the forge artist taking that piece of wood or whatever they'll use to do their draft pictures before they sold it to some witless museum in America or Europe, which I think is probably the most likely thing. Until now, there have been no comparative studies investigating the concordance or divergence between mummy portraits until now. Yeah, well, we're doing that right now. And individual facial traits in an infant mummy. In our study, we found high concordance between both, as evidenced by both subjective visual evaluation and biometric analysis through the match. Though the match is not 100%. Of course it's not. It's not even close to 100%. It's awful. Interestingly, the range of concordance is in the same range as that given for forensic facial reconstructed cases. So do you remember what I was saying to you earlier about how she got to that 75%. She was saying, "Oh yes, we got 75% success rate." So let's see how they get the success rate here, because it's actually explained and it's quite funny. Confirmed by a 63 to 73% concordance rate. So concordance rate, okay? So concordance basically is you show it to 100 people, yeah? 100 people, and 63 says, yeah, it looks like the thing, yeah? That's what the concordance rate is. This isn't some kind of like, this is not picked out of a line of, which one of it out of these 6 is the correct one. And no, it's none of that. This is just like, okay, so here's our reconstruction and here's the portrait. Do you think they look like the same person? Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. Yeah, they look the same. Okay, cool. And that's it. Now you're part of that percentage. It's like, come on. Furthermore, this means that the portrait does indeed depict an infant. In consequence, the portrait must have been finished either during its lifetime or shortly after death, before the body was embalmed. There are, however, certain distinct differences between the portrait and face. On a subjective level, the portrait appears slightly older. Okay, now think about why that would be the case. Yeah, it doesn't look slightly older. The portrait looks like maybe someone in their early teens, and you saw from the skull that that was a very young child. Why would they do that? Well, maybe they'll use templated faces. Sorry guys, you're gonna get a templated face of a teenager on this. Like what? Anyway, on a biometric level, the width of the nose and the mouth are smaller in the portrait than on the face. Yes, much smaller, even though you tried to make them too small, which might explain the perceived difference in age. Okay, but you ignored that and you still made a reconstruction that was. Anyway, besides the observations of concordance divergence, there exists a study that shows specific paleoneurological disorders in a series of Fayum portraits. I like the way they described that, paleoneurological disorders in the portraits. No, the artist was just rubbish. Okay. Sorry, maybe not. Let me read this. Therefore, Appenzella and all screened 200 mummy portraits, included one fixed to the skull, which was investigated by CT scan, however, without facial reconstruction. In this series, 6 faces with neuropathological diagnosis could be identified, which range from facial hematrophy to deviation of visual axes and correctopia, oval deviation of the pupils. So this is what I was talking about earlier, the fact that the portraits just aren't very good. Although the portrait in our present study does not provide pathological features. Why are they talking about it like the artist has truly recreated what the person looked like in life? It's just a bad painting. I don't know why they're trying to give a diagnosis up. Maybe I'm missing something. That's just going right over my head. I'm trying to see, was there anything else? I mean, we could go on, but I think we've kind of covered it now. Essentially, we've looked at 6 reconstructions. We've looked at the infant one, which clearly, in fact, I wanted to show you one more thing, and this is kind of like me feeling sorry for people, because there's this, I found this Reddit with someone who's gone around recreating these Fayum portraits, and actually they're really good reconstructions. I mean, they're really good reconstructions that look very much like the Fayum portraits. The problem is like the Fayum portraits aren't based on anything real. Okay, maybe they're based on Egyptian people that lived in the 19th century, that Petrie's hired hand was took portraits of, and as you can see, reproduced them on a couple of occasions. But the problem is you've kind of wasted your time, because these people that you've painted, it seems from the study that we've just done, were not real. Okay, these people weren't real. Yeah, these people just seem to be made up. Now, where do I sit with this is the big question. Okay, where do I sit with this? Is the whole idea of Fayum portraits fabricated? I don't think so. I think you had some real Fayum portraits. I think most of the Fayum portraits that were probably real were probably discovered in that early period that they spoke about. And you saw that the earliest ones just looked kind of like a bit darker and a bit, a bit more kind of regional. But then you had that massive influx that came with Graff and Petrie. And I think that's when the fakery started. And I think it was a combination of outright fabrication alongside tampering, as we saw with one of those portraits. And I actually think what would probably yield, what might yield some benefit with some of these Fayum portraits would be to get them to do what they did with their International Portrait Gallery and actually start x-raying them and putting them under infrared analysis to see if there's portraits beneath them. That would be really interesting to see. But as far as I sit now, I have a completely different perspective on the Fayum portraits that I had before. Because I thought before doing this investigation, I had no reason to suspect them. I just thought, there's a bunch of Greeks. That's how the Greeks looked when they settled. Now I'm like, I don't know what the hell's going on with the Fayum portraits. Honestly, were the Greeks far more melanated than we knew? I don't know. I just don't know. I haven't formulated. So I'm sitting here telling you, I haven't formulated a thesis or conclusion as to what this all means. I have absolutely no idea what this means. What I do know is that the Fayum portraits are not real. Something about them is a big red flag. And I think it's been proven. I think that's the data we've looked at today of the 6 reconstructions that we've kind of looked at that were uncovered, and they were done by different groups. We have the child, we have the 5 reconstructions by Wilkinson and Neve. Okay, we have the portraits that were painted over in the Getty Museum. We've just got too much skullduggery going on for us, for me personally, to be able to take any of them seriously. I can't. So the Fayum portraits have now joined my list of blacklisted, I should say red listed, of red listed ancient Egyptian artworks that are just fakes. So I that's how I see it. That's kind of me. That's where I'm going. That's where I am with it. I'm happy to look into it even more. I'll probably release some kind of a short documentary on this, because obviously this is a live stream. These live streams always end up being really long. But I can see myself doing a kind of documentary on it where I kind of uncover all of this data and allow people to come to their own conclusion. But that's kind of my thoughts on it. Adam said groundbreaking. Thank you. I'm glad that's the whitelist. Yeah, it's true. I should say whitelisted. Yeah. Because it's whitewashing, whitelisting. Why not? But that's it really. I hope that was informative to people. I don't know if anyone's got kind of any questions they wanted to fire to me before I shoot off. I don't know why I've got a little bit of energy. It's 11:30 over here, and I will be going immediately to bed after this. But any thoughts anyone's got? But yeah, that's it for me. Well, yeah, Greece has got high levels of African genetic data, just pointed out by Darth Skywalker. Yeah, interesting, very much so. I'm glad people found it useful. A lot of people saying thank you. Appreciate you guys joining us. Hit the likes up. I really appreciate everyone joining. There was a lot of reading. I did see that was going to be the case. There was a hell of a lot of reading today. But I hope it was useful. We kind of like built up. It took a long time to build up the story, but we kind of got there in the end. Thank you everyone who made donations. Just read you out again: Stephen, Jonathan, Know Thyself, and I know I had a few people that have disappeared from my comments. 1 second. Soul Poster, Ambush Predator, Is that everyone? And Kadir, I know you made, yeah, you gave the first one. So yeah, so there you go. Big, big, big thank you to everyone for joining today. I think we can wrap it up and call it a day now. I'm just gonna quickly scroll down, see if there's anything new coming that I've missed. Blah blah blah. Yeah, the Southern Italians themselves, other than Metatron, will tell you they have high amounts of black ancestry. Um, the Sicilians, if you meet them, they look physically like they look a little bit like the modern Aboriginal population. A lot of them, in that they've obviously hybridized, not like the proper native Aboriginals, but the kind of modern mixed ones. A lot of them have that kind of a similarish kind of look to that. So yeah, they show a lot of kind of recent African ancestry. Um, yeah, that's it. Let's call it a day. Thank you everyone for joining. Appreciate everyone. Yeah, and hit the likes up before you go, and have a fantastic evening. And I'll see you on the next one. And I appreciate you guys all coming.